So I want to move to some questions from the audience because we got a lot. One of the first ones we got was, what the protesters say Mauna Kea is sacred land. I mean, the King Kamehameha II, this is phrased as put an end to this. Why has this not been researched? I think the reference to here is that Kamehameha II abolished the kapu religion at the urging of his mother and Queen Kaahumanu, who is Kamehameha's favored wife. How does that inform your thinking? So this is a question for all of you, if it informs your thinking at all on this question. And I know, James, maybe we start with you because you were on our Defining Sacred panel discussing this exact topic. Or we can not start. We can go somewhere else. You want to go somewhere else first? All right. Mailani?
The scientist.
I would not second guess my king's decision. And if there were a modern monarchy to uphold this, I would not second guess that.
Heather? I know that you didn't want to talk about it, but since I'm asking you anyway.
Well, I just don't want to talk about, one person's belief system being better than another, because we have a diverse set of beliefs in this entire world. As far as that, so the question was getting at, so it talks about the kapu system being abolished. Well, essentially, I guess I don't understand.
What is your thought? I mean, does that inform your thinking on this topic in any way? The fact that the kapu system was abolished by our ancestors in a very forthright, unquestionable manner, temples torn down, the system abolished, kapu broken, eating men and women, one of the incredibly feminist act, in my opinion, because men and women couldn't eat with men, which is just weird and boring. Why would we want? Anyway, so the fact that was abolished, and then there was and to the extent that was a very important part of the culture. I mean, we can emphasize that, but we all changed. But there was also a war fought. I mean, we fought a civil war, not to the extent that should or should not decide things. It gets very complicated because Kamehameha conquered the whole state through war, which is why we're called Hawaii, and there's an island called Hawaii. So clearly, war was an important part of our culture back in the day. But does that historical fact inform your thinking on this topic in any way?
Yes, it does. It shows me that we are a reflective people, that we are willing to make changes, and sometimes some very critical, severe changes in what we feel like is a step forward, because I think that's what that was, right? As a woman, and having studied that, and acknowledging women's rights, that was critical. And so I think it's important. That is definitely fed into my mind of what does it mean for me to be an astronomer as a Native Hawaiian? Am I, having been the second to Paul Coleman, there's no precedent for what that means in the professional sense, right? And even in the traditional sense, we did not use observatories to do astronomy. And so what I'm doing is new. What my fellow scientists here are doing is new, right? We're groundbreaking. We're setting the path for hopefully what will be a beautiful tradition that is embraced by our community, right? The abolishment eventually became very much a good thing, right? It wasn't something that suddenly the people were up in arms about. There was disagreement.
There were some people up in arms, and they were killed in a battle. That was how things were done back in the day. I'm glad we're not doing that anymore, and that, frankly, is one of the things.
Well, not everybody was up in arms, right?
No, not everybody. Absolutely not.
And so it worked out, I guess, in the end. But.
Well, I guess, and that's the other question about it, really, and that's what we discussed too. It's the issue is not so much that the kapu religion was or was not abolished, or the manner in which it was abolished, but the fact that there are organizations like SACNAS that come out and say Native Hawaiians are like this, but the reality of the situation is such that we actually eliminated the religion upon which the sacredness claims are now being made about Mauna Kea, where there's this claim of sacredness, and everybody's saying, oh, the Hawaiians think it's sacred. This is the most Hawaiian mountain. The rocks out there saying, oh, this mountain is sacred to the Native Hawaiians, except that we severed the link between state and religion when we broke the kapu system. And so my question is, does it inform you? And maybe it does not, because it's simply something that we've moved forward from.
Yeah, so for me, this information is, it is important, because this goes back to, like, what are we defining as Native Hawaiian culture? And, you know, there might be, like, some sense of where people try to make a credibility of, like, okay, well, Hawaiians of old did things this way, so that's what Hawaiian culture is. So by, you know, when we talk about, you know, the kapu system being overthrown and abolished, then that brings into question, okay, why did we decide that this religion is the most credible one, or is the one that is, you know, the most traditional? So that's kind of how I see it. It starts to question, how are we defining old Hawaiian culture? Where do we define that it is now, I guess, or how do we make arguments of credibility of one being more traditional than the other? Because, you know, like this, the religion was abolished, is there any credible argument to say that, oh, this religion is more traditional Hawaiian than not having this religion? Yeah.
Jim, you look ready.
There's an inherent inconsistency and inherent hypocrisy to claim that a very, very small, narrow portion of a cultural and or religious belief has any control over anybody else's behavior when the claim is that it is somehow genuine or authentic, when the system upon which it was a very small part of has been, by its own people, rejected. Kapu, for those of you who may not know about kapu, guided everything you did from when you woke until you slept, and even intruded into your dreams. It was a system of control and a structure of every aspect of every Hawaiian's life. And at the top of the pyramid of this system of control were the chiefs, who were the representatives of the gods on earth, administered by the priest. And the highest priest in Hawaii was Hewa Hewa. And in 1819, it was Hewa Hewa, our highest priest, who instructed all of the kahuna, all the other priests, to join with him and destroy the temples that they had spent their lives in for 1,000 years, had practiced a form of religion which they rejected. And when there was a rebellion against that move, against Liho, who was king at the time, and Ka'ahumanu, who was the regent, who was really the power behind the throne, nonetheless, that was then played out in the Hawaiian fashion. The exercise of mana was settled on the battlefield at Kuomo'o, where Kekuokalani and his wife Manono were killed with muskets. There was no hesitation to use technology by the Hawaiians to exercise a very traditional act, which was the exercise of mana in the most extreme fashion, which is life and death. And because of the outcome of that battle, from a Hawaiian point of view, that settled it. Otherwise, Liho would have lost, and Kekuokalani and Manono would have prevailed, and we would still live under kapu today. But the gods did not support that decision.
There's a question about the implications of current events, and it's fundamentally, given that TMT has said they're not prepared to begin construction for the foreseeable future and the state withdrawing law enforcement, do you see that as an indication that this is over, that they're moving to the Canary Islands? I mean, I have a thought on it too, and I might have more information, but do you have a thought on it also, Jim?
I'm reluctant to impose any intelligence or intention on the decision of the governor to remove the security on the mountain. The strategy for the management of the mountain and the protests is not decipherable as far as I can tell.
As far as I'm aware, there's also a year and a half longer on the TMT's permit, so the fact that they're not moving forward now is irrelevant, as far as I know, to the situation.
It is irrelevant, but it really depends more upon the money. the various entities that will fund the project will make their own decisions, like they have in the past. I mean, there's a reason why the governor did not immediately go in and arrest protesters at the beginning. And it was at the request of certain entities, TMT entities, because of a political question as to how that would be played out. And there was an election in another country, and at that time, there was a request from that government to the TMT to not exercise what could be an ugly enforcement action at that moment. And so I think Kauka Kaluna is correct when she says that this is a very complicated matter, but it's not complicated in the way you think it is. It's not complicated in terms of whether or not there's lots of rubbish or not. It's really complicated in terms of the extraordinarily powerful interests of international entities, domestic entities, and state politics that have the control. There could be a decision tomorrow to enforce. That's completely within the authority and ability of our government officials. And they could move, the TMT entities could move tomorrow and say, nope, Hawaii, you're too much trouble, and then go to another place. That's not something we can control. That's why it's really complicated on the telescope side.